We often assume that maturity comes with age, but real emotional growth is much more complicated. Many women find themselves stuck in the same patterns, struggling with relationships, repeating the same mistakes, or feeling unfulfilled despite doing everything right. Why does this happen? Is it just a lack of responsibility, or is there something deeper at play? Carl Jung's work suggests that immaturity isn't always a choice. It can be the result of unconscious patterns formed in childhood, reinforced by society, and left unexamined for years. Women are often expected to be emotionally mature from a young age, to be nurturing, selfless, and in control of their emotions. But what happens when those expectations don't leave room for real personal growth? When maturity is something imposed rather than developed, it often remains superficial. Beneath the surface, unresolved fears, insecurities, and dependencies can keep a person emotionally stuck, no matter how old they get. Jung's ideas help us understand why this happens, and more importantly, what can be done about it. If true maturity means becoming a whole, independent person, then breaking free from these unconscious patterns is the first step. Maturity isn't automatic. Just because a woman grows older doesn't mean she naturally develops emotional depth or psychological strength. Many women reach adulthood but still feel stuck, trapped in the same emotional struggles, repeating the same mistakes, or relying on others to define their sense of self. So, what stops psychological growth? 1. Overprotection in childhood. Some women never learn independence because they were overly sheltered as children. When parents shield a child from difficulties, decision-making, and responsibility, they unintentionally prevent them from developing resilience. As a result, these women may struggle with self-reliance and look to others, partners, friends, or even authority figures, to guide their lives. 2. Unresolved trauma and emotional wounds. Painful past experiences can also stunt emotional development. A woman who has experienced deep emotional wounds, whether from family dysfunction, betrayal, or loss, may develop a subconscious fear of responsibility. Taking charge of her own life feels overwhelming, so she avoids it, remaining emotionally dependent on others or stuck in patterns of avoidance. 3. Cultural conditioning. Society often encourages women to seek external validation rather than true self-discovery. From an early age, many women are taught that their worth depends on how they are perceived, whether they are attractive, agreeable, or likable. This focus on pleasing others can replace the natural process of self-exploration, leaving them disconnected from their true identity. Carl Jung believed that a person remains immature when they avoid the struggles necessary for personal growth. True psychological development requires facing discomfort, taking responsibility, and confronting one's own fears and weaknesses. If these challenges are avoided, a woman may remain psychologically young, no matter her age. Maturity isn't about following society's timeline. It's about doing the inner work to become a whole, independent person. And for those who feel stuck, recognizing these patterns is the first step toward real growth. In mythology, we have the idea of the puer aeternus, the eternal boy, the man who refuses to grow up. But Carl Jung also recognized a female counterpart, the Puella Aeterna, or the eternal girl, a woman who clings to youth, avoids responsibility, and resists the psychological challenges of adulthood. This is Peter Pan syndrome in women, the refusal to step into full maturity, instead staying trapped in a mindset of idealism, avoidance, and dependency. The characteristics of the Puella Aeterna are: 1. Romantic idealism. Searching for a savior. The Puella Aeterna often sees life through the lens of fairy tales, where love will fix everything and the right person will come along to rescue her from responsibility. Instead of building her own independence, she waits for the perfect partner to give her a sense of purpose. This can show up in relationships as constantly chasing an idealized romance rather than forming a deep, real connection. Feeling incomplete or lost without a relationship. Attracting partners who enable dependency rather than growth. 2. Avoidance of responsibility. Life should be fun, not serious. A core trait of the eternal girl is resisting structure, discipline, and hard work. She may bounce between jobs, struggle with commitment, or avoid anything that feels too boring or adult. Rather than taking control of her life, she may live in a state of extended adolescence, seeking excitement while avoiding deeper challenges. This can manifest as jumping from one passion to the next without real progress, feeling overwhelmed by the idea of long-term planning, a tendency to procrastinate or avoid making tough decisions. 3. Fear of aging, clinging to youth for validation. For the Puella Aeterna, youth is not just a stage of life, it's an identity. Because she hasn't built a strong inner sense of self, she relies on external beauty, attention, or charm to maintain her value. Aging becomes a terrifying loss rather than a natural process. This can lead to an obsession with staying young at any cost, defining self-worth through appearance and external validation, struggling to accept the deeper aspects of adulthood, self-awareness, wisdom, and independence. How this plays out in life. The Puella Aeterna mindset can shape a woman's relationships, career, and self-image. In romantic life, she may attract partners who either control her or enable her immaturity. In career, she might struggle with long-term commitment, switching jobs frequently, or avoiding serious responsibility. In self-image, she may feel empty without validation from others, leading to cycles of insecurity. Jung believed that true psychological maturity comes through individuation, the process of becoming a whole and independent person. The Puella Aeterna resists this process, staying in a state of psychological childhood. Instead of facing her shadow, the hidden fears, insecurities, and responsibilities she avoids, she stays in the illusion of eternal youth. But this refusal to grow up comes at a cost. A woman who never confronts her deeper self will eventually feel lost, anxious, and unfulfilled, no matter how much fun she has or how young she looks. The real path to freedom isn't clinging to childhood. It's embracing adulthood with awareness, strength, and self-ownership. Why do some women struggle to grow up psychologically? It's not just a personal failing. It's something that society actively reinforces. Women are often rewarded for staying in a state of emotional and psychological immaturity. Being seen as cute, innocent, or playful is often more socially appealing than being serious, independent, and self-possessed. The cultural reinforcement of eternal girlhood. Modern culture romanticizes the eternal girl, a woman who is lighthearted, carefree, and dependent on others. This is reflected in romantic comedies, where the female lead is often naive, clumsy, or whimsical, waiting for love to give her life meaning. Social media influencers who play into childlike aesthetics, soft voices, exaggerated innocence, and avoiding deeper intellectual conversations. The beauty industry, which sells youth as the ultimate form of power, making aging seem like something to fear rather than embrace. Unlike men, who are encouraged to mature and take on responsibility, women often receive the message that staying youthful and carefree is more desirable than growing wise and independent. How this has changed over time. Historically, women were expected to mature much sooner. In many societies, women took on significant responsibilities, running households, managing finances, and making key decisions in their families and communities. While these expectations were often restrictive, they at least recognized women as capable adults. Today, many women have more freedom than ever before. Yet at the same time, the pressure to remain in a state of arrested development has increased. Adulthood is often delayed, and responsibilities are postponed, leading many to feel lost when they eventually have to face real challenges. Jung believed that immaturity is not just an individual issue, it's a cultural phenomenon. When society glorifies youth and discourages deep self-reflection, it keeps people from truly individuating, from fully growing into their own unique, independent selves. Women who remain in the Puella Aeterna mindset may not even realize they are stuck because the world around them constantly rewards and reinforces their immaturity. True psychological growth, however, requires breaking free from these cultural narratives. choosing depth over superficiality, self-discovery over validation, and real adulthood over the illusion of eternal girlhood. In Jungian psychology, the shadow is the part of the psyche we suppress, the traits we reject because they don't fit how we want to see ourselves or how society expects us to be. For many women, the shadow contains their own power, assertiveness, ambition, independence, and even anger. But instead of embracing these qualities, many women push them down out of fear. Fear of being judged, rejected, or seen as too much. Instead, they may retreat into immaturity as a defense mechanism, staying in a role that feels safer and more socially acceptable. Why do women reject their own strength? From an early age, many women are taught to be pleasant, agreeable, and likable rather than bold, decisive, or strong-willed. Society often punishes women who show too much independence or ambition, labeling them as intimidating, difficult, or unfeminine. Over time, this pressure can lead to self-sabotage, where a woman unconsciously downplays her strengths to fit in. Examples of the shadow feminine in action. A woman hides her intelligence or acts naive to avoid intimidating others. She avoids leadership roles because being in charge feels uncomfortable or unnatural. She stays in relationships where she is dependent rather than stepping into her full independence. She dismisses her own ambitions, telling herself that success isn't important or that she's not ready to pursue what she really wants. In each of these cases, immaturity becomes a shield, a way to avoid criticism, responsibility, or the discomfort of stepping into personal power. Jung believed that true growth comes from integrating the shadow, acknowledging and embracing the parts of ourselves that we've rejected. For women, this means recognizing that qualities like ambition, assertiveness, and independence are not flaws or dangers. They are essential for becoming a whole, fully developed person. Breaking free from immaturity isn't just about growing up in the traditional sense. It's about reclaiming the power that was pushed into the shadow. The power to think independently, make bold choices, and live life on one's own terms. Breaking free from psychological immaturity isn't about forcing oneself to grow up in a conventional sense. It's about deep inner transformation. Carl Jung believed that true maturity comes from individuation, the process of integrating all parts of the psyche to become a whole, independent self. For women stuck in the Puella Aeterna mindset, this means confronting the unconscious patterns that keep them trapped and stepping into their full potential. Maturity begins with self-honesty. Many women suppress parts of themselves, whether it's their ambition, anger, independence, or strength, because these qualities don't fit societal expectations. Instead of rejecting these traits, they must be faced and understood. Fear of rejection, failure, or responsibility often lingers in the background, shaping unconscious behaviors. Desires that challenge social norms may be ignored, and self-sabotage can quietly keep a person from stepping into their full power. True growth begins when these hidden aspects are acknowledged and integrated, rather than feared. Another major shift comes from breaking free from external validation. Many women are conditioned to seek approval, to be liked, admired, or desired. This keeps them dependent on how others perceive them, rather than focusing on their own internal growth. Psychological maturity requires moving away from performing for others, and instead, making choices based on personal values. When depth is prioritized over superficiality, and self-worth is no longer tied to beauty, status, or relationships, a woman begins to build a life that is truly her own. A crucial aspect of this transformation is integrating both feminine and masculine energies. Jung believed that every person contains both. The feminine, associated with intuition, emotional depth, and connection, and the masculine, linked to strength, independence, and rational thinking. Many women resist their inner masculine, staying passive rather than stepping into leadership, avoiding logical decision-making, or hesitating to assert themselves. A woman who balances both sides of herself moves beyond limiting stereotypes and into a fuller, more empowered state of being. Perhaps the most important step in psychological maturity is taking full responsibility for one's life. Many women unconsciously wait for a savior, a partner, a mentor, or a lucky break to change their circumstances. But transformation happens when responsibility is embraced, when choices are owned rather than blamed on external circumstances, and when resilience is developed instead of avoiding challenges. The moment a woman realizes that no one is coming to save her, she stops waiting and starts becoming the heroine of her own story. At its core, individuation is about becoming a complete, self-aware individual, free from the unconscious patterns that keep a person stuck. Letting go of the eternal girl identity, facing fears, and building a life based on self-knowledge and purpose is the true path to psychological maturity. It isn't about conforming to society's expectations of adulthood. It's about stepping into one's full potential, embracing all aspects of the self and living with independence, depth, and purpose. Maturity is not something that simply happens with age. It is a choice, a process of self-awareness and growth. Many women remain psychologically stuck not because they lack the ability to mature, but because they have been conditioned to avoid the very challenges that lead to true independence. Society rewards youthfulness, discourages deep self-exploration, and often makes it easier to stay in a state of dependence rather than embrace full adulthood. But real empowerment does not come from staying in the comfort of immaturity. It comes from individuation, the journey of becoming a whole, self-sufficient person. It requires the courage to face one's shadow, to move beyond the need for validation, and to take full responsibility for one's life. The real question is not why some women remain immature, but rather, who is ready to step into full psychological adulthood?